Did you know that 75% of careers are derailed for reasons related to emotional competencies, such as the inability to handle interpersonal problems, unsatisfactory leadership during times of conflict, or inability to adapt to change? EQ skills can be learned, and our Unlocking EQ course teaches individuals and teams to become more emotionally competent. The course covers practical skills in 15 areas of EQ, such as communication, building trust, and accountability. Research tells us that EQ explains 58% of success in all types of jobs, and 90% of top performers are also high in emotional intelligence. If you are ready to invest in the EQ of your team, contact us about the Unlocking EQ course. Now, please enjoy today's episode of Magic in the Room.
Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Hannah Braderud, and today my co-host is none other than our producer, Ben West.
Yeah, so I'm Ben West. So thank you for having me, letting me sit in Chris's chair for the hour. Today we're joined by Chandy O'Neal, and Chandy is the food operations manager at Grand Lake Casino. I'm really excited that you're here. Thank you for making the drive. You might be, well, that's not true. You are one of our farthest coming guests, because a lot of our guests are kind of in Tulsa. So thanks for making the drive over.
In studio guests, that is.
Right, in
we
studio
sometimes
guests.
Have guests that are not in Oklahoma.
Exactly. We do remote guests, but you may be the farthest driving guest. So yeah, so thanks for joining us. I'm really excited. And we are going to start off, as we do often, with our question of the day. We're just going to do a classic. This is one that we really like, is just tell me something good. So what's something good from both of you that have been going on in the last week, month, kind of whatever you got?
I think for me, my tell me something good is just being here on this podcast. I've never been asked to do anything quite this cool, so I'm pretty pumped about that.
Well, we are really cool, so you know.
That's right. That's right.
That's definitely a good thing. No, we're really happy to have you. For me, something good is fall in Montana, and as our regular listeners know, I am based in Montana, and I just recently moved from Bozeman to Big Sky. Big Sky is a resort town, and it's higher up in the mountains. And this year we've had the most phenomenal fall. Usually what happens is, September might be kind of nice, and then October hits and it's just cold, rainy, windy, or it dumps snow. And so you might have a turning of the leaves, and then all of a sudden all the leaves are gone. Not this year. It's been this incredibly mild, long, lingering fall. We've had a real fall, and the leaves have been unbelievable. By the time you're listening to this, we're probably already into winter, but it's supposed to turn this weekend. It's supposed to snow on Saturday, which is when I get back into Big Sky. So I might be coming home to snow, but up until this point, I have thoroughly enjoyed fall in Montana.
Awesome. Yeah, by the time this comes out, you may be skiing.
I might be skiing, which is also awesome.
Yeah, for sure. So my tell me something good is, and this will be done by the time this episode comes out also, but next week my family and I, we're going to go spend a few days in Colorado.
Ooh.
So it's actually, I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and it's kind of going to be our first family vacation where we've gone just us to get away, not going and seeing family or anything like that. So really excited about that. Excited for my kids to get to see the mountains, see the stars, that kind of thing. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah. Well, next family vacation, you're going to have to take them to Montana.
Yes.
Even more mountains.
That would be great.
I'd say mine really enjoyed Colorado, and they're around the same age, and they had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
It was really good just to disconnect from, tablets and internet and things like that, and they had an amazing time.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so what's kind of like a favorite memory for you from that trip with your kids there?
Really, it was just the hiking. Probably my favorite memory is they were asleep in the back of the car, and so the closer you can see the mountains on the borderline way far out there, and they just get bigger and bigger. And it was sunset, and it was so beautiful, and we just woke them up, and they were so excited because they've never seen mountains either, and they were just so excited, and they were just so like lit up. That's probably my favorite memory, is just watching them kind of twinkle in their eyes, sparkle around.
Yeah, absolutely.
They were really
cool.
pumped for it. So
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what I'm looking forward to, is like new first-time experiences for them. So be excited.
it's a good time.
Yeah. So first-time experience for me hosting the podcast, first-time experience for Chandy being on a podcast, and we'll just dive into our topic. So,
And I think first time for me not having Luke or Chris here
That's true.
co-hosting. So
That's true.
I think we're all experiencing something
It's
new
a whole bunch of
right
firsts
now.
today.
Exactly, which is great. It's what we want to do. So.
Yep.
So, we've been talking quite a bit this season about this idea of the Great Resignation, how people are changing jobs a lot, leaving jobs, all of those things. And it's a big issue, a complicated issue, like exactly why people are doing that, why that's happening. There's lots of really smart economists and sociologists, all of those people trying to figure that out. But I definitely think that part of it, and research probably bears this out, is just that people are realizing that they're working jobs that are unhealthy environments, and they're realizing that there's other opportunities out there. It's a chance to change, go try to find something new.
Yeah, and some of what we've talked about too is how, COVID and the lockdown kind of created the perfect storm for that, right? Because, you may have already gotten fired from the job that you had that may not have been a really awesome job, but you were there, and it was a way to make some money and provide for your family in some way. And then you got this huge break where you got to really just get introspective and think about, what do I really want to do with my life, right? And so when jobs came back and we went back to work, a lot of people didn't go back to the same industry they were in.
Yeah, exactly. And, we know that hospitality, food service has been hit particularly hard by this issue. And so you, Chandy, work in that industry. And so I thought it'd just be interesting to have you on and give us some perspective. And I really appreciate kind of your story of how you've seen some changes in that industry that you've been able to try to bring about at Grand Lake Casino. And so I just want to hear your story and let listeners hear your story. So let's just begin at the beginning. How did you kind of get into food service way back when you first started?
For me, I think it was just, I needed a job, and that's how a lot of people get into it. They just need the job. So, you go out and you find one, that's pretty much all that part was. So, I got there, and, nobody wants to flip burgers. They're all, I don't want to do that. But it was actually, in the beginning, pretty nice, right? You work with the same people, everybody has the same job. It flows together really well. The hard times, I think, is the bad part, and the leadership that you take from food service. Not all food service. I've been in places where, your managers are nice, but it only takes that one person, and that goes for teammates too. It only takes that one person to kind of ruin an entire shift and, create angst amongst everyone. So, I just, like I said, I needed the job, so I entered into that.
Yeah. Well, and then you stayed in it. What's kept you in that industry?
I think not a lot of people understand that there's so much growth in food, if you want to do it. Like I said, nobody wants to flip burgers, but when it comes down to it, there are people I know personally that started out as a 16-year-old flipping burgers that is now a franchisee. Like they own part of that company. They're running their own stores, and I'm just like, you give it, you give a lot of grief, but there's a lot of room if you want to do it.
Yeah.
And, I like the people. The place that I started into, a lot of kids come in really young. It's one of those jobs where, that's a kid's first job. And I still speak to a lot of those kids. I watch them grow up. They come in for homecoming. I have pictures on my phone of their homecomings, their proms, their graduations.
Wow.
So it becomes, almost a family. And that was probably one of the hardest parts of, leaving, was having to leave all those kids behind and everybody, even the customers, you get the right customer base and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of why I've stayed in food, because, I see where there is room for change and I would like to help that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm just thinking about, there's a coffee shop that I go to, and this was kind of a couple years ago because COVID kind of messed us all up. But like there was a day when I came in and it had been raining and I was wet, and the guy, Ben, behind the counter, who like at this point I'm kind of a regular, he's just like, you need a hot chocolate. He knew what I wanted. He like gave it to me, and it's just kind of on the house thing.
Nice.
And just that like community that can get built around food and, fellowshipping together is really valuable. So yeah, that's interesting that's kind of your perspective of what kept you in.
Go ahead.
Well, so I'm curious though, like on the other side of it, share a couple of experiences that were kind of negative. Like when we say that the food service industry can be toxic, like paint a picture of that for us.
It can be toxic not only from your management and your fellow team members, but also from the outside world, right? Like, I've had burgers thrown at me. I've had shakes thrown at me. I have been cussed, called every kind of name. And some of these things are, it's over small things. And, that person is obviously just having a bad day. They needed somebody to take that out on. Should it be, food service? No. But unfortunately, that's where they take the blunt force of that. And I think that's why it's so hard in food and why it's so toxic, because if you're just, this lonely little worker that wants to come to work and make everybody's day awesome, and, you take that plate out to somebody who's not having a good day, they start firing onto you. And if you work in a toxic place, I've had, I left because of, a toxic manager. I loved her. Like we were friends, but manager wise, I just, I couldn't handle it anymore. It got pretty bad once she decided that she was going to leave. People's quality of work either stays the same or it deteriorates, and hers did not stay the same. And it took a long while for me to decide to leave. But, if you have a manager, though, that is yelling and screaming at you and calling you all kinds of names, or just disregarding your feelings about, what's going on, it's hard for you to take this person's complaint and then, maybe it's their food is cold, they blow up about it. So you take it back, and now you have to turn around and take this plate, and you're already beat down from the customer, but now you have to take this plate to your manager, who's going to take their anger for this person and their food out on you. And, I don't blame people for, getting a little break and figuring out what they do want to do. And I'm not surprised that the food industry is going through this, because, it is not everywhere. Not everywhere is toxic. It's not. There are leaders out there that, I'm assuming came kind of like I did from the bottom up, so they know how, crappy it is to be treated poorly on one end, and you don't need it on both ends, right?
Right.
Then you're just in a barrel and you can't get out.
So the interesting thing, here is, and you kind of alluded to it, Ben, but, food is such a connector. It's how, when we sit down and share a meal together, it's one of the most connective human experiences, right? We bond over meals, we create community over meals. It can be a place that really brings people together. Families go out with their kids to a restaurant. They create shared memories and experiences. And I do think in a healthy, restaurant environment, you can have this really tight-knit family atmosphere as well. And yet at the same time, the food industry tends to be a low-wage environment. And we've seen this now, and over our last few episodes, we've talked about what's happened in a lot of those low-wage environments. during COVID, you may have lost your job, and they may have become really clear how uncertain that industry really is, right? And so now what employers are struggling with, especially in lower wage environments, is, okay, people got burned. They were already not making enough to really provide a very good living for their family. And on top of that, if the environment they came from was one that you just described, where it was toxic, where people were mistreated or not, not being engaged to the level of being able to do their best work. So it's tough then to convince people to come back to that when they've had a break and they've had to think about it and maybe gone outside and found out that, there are other jobs that, I could make more money and have a better experience at work, right? So that's a tough sell.
Yeah, it is a really tough sell.
Yeah.
And, Chandy, you kind of had that experience in a way because you were in that toxic environment, but then you moved to Grand Lake Casino. Like, we should be clear, like, when you're talking about this toxic environment, it's not Grand Lake Casino. It was a former place that you worked. So, you got to experience something new. And sometime in one of our conversations, you kind of just shared with me that when you moved into this new place, it was almost hard to believe that it didn't have to be toxic. So tell me about that and what that was like.
Yeah. I'd been at my other job for a long time. And so just to kind of break out of that, like, I had to take a little bit of a hiatus, right? And I'm like, I can't go, anywhere and work anywhere. So I took a little bit of a break, and then I applied for Grand Lake, and then I got there and I'm just like, oh man, like, it was shocking to kind of remember that, you don't have to be yelled at. Like, things can just go, with the flow. And it was kind of hard, honestly, because, you are, I was used to fast and aggressive. And so I did have a tendency to be fast and aggressive because, that's kind of what I was bred into.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit of an adjustment trying to, and when I came to GLC, I wasn't in a management position when I got hired. So that too was a little bit of an adjustment because I'm like, well, I don't know why we're doing it like that, but I will do it like that because that's what somebody else said we need to do. So it was kind of hard to, switch off manager brain and find your footing in a world that's nice, like, nobody, like I said, nobody's yelling at you, nobody's screaming at you. The guests even, are amazing most of the time. A lot of them are regulars too. It's nice to know that, everywhere you go, like you said, that everywhere you go, there's regulars, right? And they're just so sweet. All the managers are amazing, and then once I moved into management, the managers continue to be amazing. I've had a lot of, great experiences, bounce ideas off of them. And it's nice to see that, nobody there is toxic. They're not yelling at everybody. They're not, mad about this, mad about that. And if they are upset, they take it, they process it, and then they're like, okay, they take a second, and then they take it to the people. And I'm not used to that. I'm used to, just explode, and everyone gets hit with shrapnel, whether you were part of the conversation or not. And so,
so what do you think? What do you think is the biggest difference that causes such a different experience for you in these two different workplaces, same industry, different workplace, different team, different dynamic? What do you think makes that difference?
I would have to say just probably the leadership in it. If you have a strong, confident leader that, is relatively calm under pressure, kind of has your answers, doesn't belittle you, things like that, it makes you a better, employee or, I don't want to say person, but, you know, you have the capability of that because, you know, you almost have to be that better role model so that your team wants to follow you, so that, you know, they know that you're there to help them.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, a lot of people in the food industry, they have just been beaten so much that they don't trust the food industry. And I get that. So,
Yeah, I want to come back a little bit in a second to that kind of how you made that transition and started realizing, oh, like it can be different. But Hannah, I'm curious first from you, like when you take a science perspective on this, like what's happening in somebody's brain when they change environments like that? Like what is a leader who has somebody coming in from that environment or even that person, like what are they up against in the wiring of their brain?
Well, let's talk a little bit about kind of the environment that you came from and some of the things that might cause that or how people respond, right? So we've talked about probably before in those podcasts about what happens to people when they're under pressure. So when we're under a lot of pressure and we're feeling a lot of pressure, it can do really weird things to us, where even the most reasonable person can turn into something of a monster, right? You talked about the manager you worked with who was your friend and not a bad person, right? But as a leader, the way she showed up created a really toxic environment. And I'm always very careful about not calling people toxic because I don't actually believe that people are toxic. It's the environment and sometimes the behaviors that people engage in that create those toxic environments, right? So, and I think when we're experiencing a lot of pressure, when we're experiencing scarcity, when we're experiencing fear, uncertainty, doubt, all of those emotions, we get into survival mode. And we have different, and we've talked about trauma on this podcast in the past, right? Which is a disruption to a system and what happens. And then what we as leaders can recognize is that there are different responses available to us, right? We have different stress responses. We don't have to jump into fight or flight. Now, that is something that happens pretty automatically. And if you're constantly triggered, it's really difficult to regulate that emotional reactivity. And so if you're part of an environment where that's the norm and everybody is reactive, which means they're actually trying to protect themselves, right? Because they're experiencing some kind of assault on their nervous system all the time, right? It's like we're at war, we're under attack, and we're in this very highly triggered state. And that's, I think, how sometimes those environments come about, right? Because you have people who don't feel like they have the right level of resources or support or protection or whatever it might be. There's a lack, there's some scarcity, and it's become socially acceptable to have this really emotionally reactive environment. And so then you take somebody from an environment like that and put them somewhere else where it's different. And I think that can also be a little bit of a shock to the system, right? Because in your experience, you know, this is what you were used to. You were used to fast and aggressive and maybe explosive and all of these things, right? That was part of a system, and it's how you knew how to operate.
Yeah. Well, because from the inside, you know, that system works.
Yeah.
From the inside, you know, like that's how, you know, this person gets them to react. So, you know, you kind of follow that and you're like, okay, that's how I need to be to get them to react. And it was just kind of a waterfall where everybody reacted like that. And so, you know, like, did it get things done? Yeah, it did. Did it cost, you know, because I'm not going to sit here and say that when I was there that I was, you know, the manager I am today. You know, I was probably a very toxic manager also because that was the environment, you know, and it's kind of one of those, you know, you don't really know any better.
Right.
You know, it was my first management position and that, like, that's what was handed to me, right? So I'm like, okay, so that must be how things are done.
Yeah.
So it was, like I said, very wild trying to come out of that and just seeing like, oh, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be that way.
Yeah. Go ahead, Hannah.
And then your second part of the question is, how do you, as a leader, work with someone who comes from maybe an environment like that, and or as a leader, you try to create a different environment. It does require change on some level, and change is uncomfortable, right? Our brains kind of are wired to go on autopilot, and we learn what works. And then the brain tries to automate that behavior, right? So it means we have to learn different habits, and that can take time, and it can feel very uncomfortable and disruptive anytime we learn something new. Even if it's something that we clearly see is a better way, it can take a while, and it can be challenging to get to that point. And so, but what I see is, in your experience, you came into a different type of culture, right? Mm-hmm. Where people weren't maybe as reactive or yelling or screaming or being as aggressive. And you were able to see that it can be different, and it can work in a different way. Because we can motivate through fear, or we can motivate through inspiration, right? And fear is 100% necessary for human survival. The three of us wouldn't be sitting here today if we didn't have fear on some level, right? Our brains are programmed to look for the negative, to look for what could possibly become a threat, so that we can get away or fight it or, survive. And at the same time, what is also true, the brain research shows that we actually learn better when we feel good than when we feel bad. The memories that we have of a positive experience are richer and more salient than memories that we have of really terrible experiences. We remember the feeling, we remember the fear, we remember what was negative about it, but we don't necessarily remember as many details about it. So from a learning perspective, focusing on creating an environment where people feel good is going to help them learn better. It's going to help them actually grow and flourish in a different way. The other environment might be effective, to your point. It might work, and you can get a lot of stuff done. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it might cost you in some other areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was talking to Ben a couple weeks ago about that, and I said the food industry has almost brought this on their self, the shortage of people and the not being able to get people hired in because they have, not all of them, mm-hmm. but a good portion of them have been so toxic for so long mm-hmm. that now they have backed themselves into a corner in our current situation, pandemic wise, and food shortage and hour shortage now and people shortage. And, they've just been that way for so long that nobody wants to work for them.
Yeah.
And so now it's how do they fix that? Mm-hmm. How do you get somebody in who has been treated like that? And I actually hired in a handful of people into GLC that came from a place, a toxic environment, and just to watch them kind of unfold and become their own people. And, it's really nice just to let them see them relax and understand that, you're not going to get treated like that here.
Yeah.
It did take some coaxing to get them in. Mm-hmm. I sent them a few messages via Facebook, and I'm like, look, I know you had a bad experience. I know what that's like, but if you're interested still in the food industry, let me show you that things don't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this kind of gets to a lot of the conversation that you and I have had that I think is really interesting, is just this idea of now you're trying to create something that's different. So, but let's start with this. Why is it important to you to create something different?
Because I remember what that was like. I remember, being in love with a job and just not wanting to do it anymore, mm-hmm. But not wanting to get away from it. And, I cried when I left that job. It was sad. Like I said, I left all those kids that I feel like, I almost raised. I was there for all their big milestones, high school wise, and just to leave them there in that environment. Like I felt terrible, leaving them in the trenches if you must. But you know when it's time to go.
Yeah.
I'm glad I pulled out when I did, because I can't say that I would be the person that I am today had I festered longer in that environment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you're leading a team now.
I am.
And how many people do you have that report to you right now?
Close to 20, I believe.
Okay.
That's a big team.
It's pretty big, yeah.
Yeah. So you're leading this big team, and you shared several stories just about success. But what are you doing differently? Like, what's the approach that you're taking that's different from maybe an environment that you came from that wasn't as positive? Like, what's the positive that you're doing?
What kind of the way I try to lead is, and I think, and it's not any fault of their own, but I think managers that have been managers for a long while, they forget how to be frontline. They forget the frontline's concerns or feelings. Like, they know, I made this change and they're mad, but they don't understand why. And that's just, management brain. Like, because here I'm doing this and this is why, and that's why you have to follow it. And I think for me, I work alongside my team. So, I have an open door. They can come and talk to me anytime that they need to. I think it's really beneficial to the team building, to let them know that you're accessible and you're not some big, like, ominous, in the dark corner manager that's gonna, bite their head off when they request time off.
Yeah.
That's another thing I make sure that, because it is hectic, food is hard.
Yep.
I make sure that, they get most of the time off that they are requesting, because I remember what it's like to, work 14 days a week, or open to close, or open to close and then open again. It's terrible. And so I try not to ask my people to do anything like that. I try to just remember, like, hey, man, that stuff's hard. Like, management is hard, but so is that. And, like, just don't beat down the little guy kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hannah, what's kind of your thoughts on, this isn't just the food industry where we need managers and leaders who don't isolate themselves, that don't, kind of sit on the mountain and give orders. So what's kind of your experience has been with managers that do or don't do that, and kind of in your life?
Yeah, I mean, it's made all the difference for me. Leaders that have been either came from the front line or from the job, right? Or who, and it doesn't mean you don't have to necessarily have to have done the job in order to be a good leader, right? It helps if you've done the job and you've sat in the seat, or you've been running the food, or you've done the things, right? So you have literally been in the shoes of the people that you lead. That's helpful from an empathetic perspective and for understanding the challenges that they're up against. And at the same time, I think what you are talking about is something really important, and it's that accessibility, which has to do with connection, being able to, that we feel like we can connect with our leaders on a personal or human level, right? This is a person that I can talk to who's not going to snap at me or bite my head off. I don't have to feel afraid in approaching them.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about what I'm getting ready to go and say to them.
Right, exactly. And so being a leader who's present among people, who doesn't lock themselves away in an office, who is actually out there observing, watching, being part of what's going on, talking to people, I think that feedback loop is so important. And I was just reminded as, I was reviewing a course that we do on emotional intelligence and EQ. So I just, as you were talking, I was, connecting with this. I was reviewing a course that we do on emotional intelligence on EQ, and I was reviewing the episode on how to promote engagement, how to create an environment where people feel engaged, right? And one of the biggest drivers of engagement is attention. What kind of attention do we give people? And there's this misnomer out there that feedback creates engagement. And it's actually not the feedback itself that creates engagement, is the fact that when we provide feedback, we're giving attention to people. And so if we can give helpful attention to what people do well, that can be the number one most important driver of engagement in the way that people feel seen and heard and valued, right? And negative attention is also a form of attention, which is why in some of those more hostile, aggressive, toxic environments, you can run a very effective operation, right? Because people are motivated by fear and they get negative attention. And so the worst thing we can do is just ignore people. If we ignore people, we will have absolutely no engagement at all. So if you're the kind of manager that you're not, but somebody who isn't present, who doesn't pay attention at all, right? People are going to disengage. And they might stick around for a long time and just be passively disengaged and not really do any more than what's absolutely necessary to keep their jobs, or they might quit, right? When we give negative attention, you're going to have higher levels of engagement. The research shows that, right? But where we really see exponential differences in engagement level is when we pay positive attention to people. So positive feedback, attention and recognition to what people do well is going to cause them to want to do more of that thing.
Right. Recognition reminded me, I actually just recently went around to my team, and because a lot of them are pretty new, there's a handful that have been there for a while, but we were talking about meaningful recognition and kind of doing those in timely manners. And then I thought, I took it upon myself because I thought, I don't know exactly how each one of my team members likes to be recognized. They might be okay with a, hey, Hannah, great job. Or they might want me to sit them down and be like, hey, Ben, you come to my office. Hey, that thing you did the other day, that was really awesome and amazing. And so I went through and I asked them, I was like, how would you prefer me to recognize your accomplishments and the things that you do? And so they're like, oh, well, I'm okay with a little, like, hey, you're doing great. And others said, like, I would like to be brought in and sit down because they like the recognition, but you also, I feel like you want to make them comfortable.
Right.
You don't want to bring them in where they're uncomfortable. They don't want to be sitting in your office, like, awkwardly while you're like, hey, you did a great job. Good job. So, because some of them, they don't like to come into my office. And they used to hate it more, but now that they come in and out more, it's a little better. But when I call them in there, they're always like, did I do something wrong? I'm like, oh, I would have told you, hey, we need to talk about some things. Yeah. I just wanted to tell you good job. So I think it was kind of an eye-opener for me and everybody else, because they were just like, wow, she cares enough to ask me, like, how I want her to tell me I'm doing a good job.
Yeah.
So, and I do have one that it kind of just, like, broke her out of her shell a little bit, like, and she's just like, thank you for asking me. I appreciate that. And I'm like, well, you're very welcome. So I've worked on, each of their different ways of recognitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that it's kind of a small switch in some ways of just going from, like, negative attention, like, to positive attention and meaningful recognition. Like, the time that it takes to do those two things is exactly the same. Like, it's all about mindset, like, what approach am I taking to this person that I'm leading? And, like, you can say the words in the same amount of time. It's just different words. Yeah. And the result is completely different. Right. So that's pretty interesting, that just making that small switch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, again, to your point, it's mindset, right? Where our focus goes, our energy flows. So if we focus on the negative, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see more of the negative. We're going to create negative environments. If we focus on the positive, we're going to see more of the positive. And as a leader, the most powerful thing we can do is to pay attention and notice when people do something well, and then actually say something about it, right? And let people know that you noticed. And that means a lot to us, right? And because it shows us, yes, somebody cared, somebody actually noticed, and then you get this like sense of, I want to do more of that, right? I want to do more for this leader because they saw me, they noticed what I did. And it's such a little thing, it's such a little switch, but when we choose to focus on what's good, that's why we start a lot of our sessions like we did today with tell me something good, right? It's about building that intentional habit of noticing the good, recognizing the good, focusing on what people do well, and you'll see people begin to flourish.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And kind of another aspect of flourishing, I think that it seems like is important to you is just the idea of equipping your team, helping them get better at their job, that employee development strength. So paint a little picture. What's that like for you? How are you equipping your team, helping them have mastery over the things that they're doing?
I think that, any job you do, somebody, you always want to move up in that job or be better at that job. Some people might be fine just sitting where they're at, right? I'm not going to say nobody wants to not move, because some people probably are happy with, the baseline, what they got. But most people, just want to succeed and move on and get better at things. And, that's kind of even what I did with myself. So I try to make sure that even if they don't stay with me, because like I said, food is a revolving door. There's always people in and out, they stay, they leave, they stay, they leave. So you have to get used to that and just know that like you might just be a stepping stone for that person, but you need to kind of dump all the information on them kind of that you can, so that their next step, they have all that with them. Maybe, I want to work in this food place and, now I want to move to this one, but they didn't teach me these things. So I think it's just helpful to kind of, just unload all that, like I said, onto them and just be like, here's these tools and here's these tasks and here's what works here and here's what doesn't. And, just make sure that they're fully prepared for whatever next step they might take, whether it's with me or, with somebody else. So.
Yeah. And that to me is very much a indication of like a leader who is kind of secure in who they are, like that they're not threatened by equipping their team. So I think that's a really important thing.
Please give me somebody to help me. I like, you know what I mean? Like, if I can ship out, and I'm not the best leader in the world, right? I know that, but if I can ship out more people with more just a baseline of, you can do better. I feel like, is it going to take a long time? Yeah, it's going to take a long time. We're never going to fully untoxify, the food industry, but I feel like if we just keep trying and we keep giving them everything that they need, that, we can try to stray away from that and bring people back into the food industry.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
We're kind of getting close to time. I wanted to give you a chance. Just, you have a platform. We have a few listeners, not a lot, but a few people listen to our podcast. So, what would you say to leaders out there in this industry? Like, what would you want them to hear from somebody like you who's played all the roles?
Don't forget kind of where you came from, and remember, especially in our current situation, that it's really hard, on that front line, because we're not immune to it, but we are pushed further back. And just kind of remember, like, they're getting the blunt of that, and some of them are terrified and they're beat down and they don't make enough money or whatever, work alongside them, work a day for them, like, it's doable, I know there's probably people like, I can't do that. I can't take time out of my time, but they're taking time out of their time for you. So you can give them a little bit. That's what I think.
Hannah, what do you take away from this conversation as you kind of sat here and listened to this idea? What's sticking with you?
Oh, there's so much here, because it's anytime we work with people, we're going to see some of the same challenges, and just recognizing that most people do the best they can every day. It may not look like it, but based on where they're at, the tools that they have, the background they came from, the situation they're currently in, the environment they're part of, people really kind of do the best they can with what they've got. And so if the best they can isn't good enough for our environment, what are the things we can do to help them be better, to help us be better, and to create an environment where people want to be, where they want to give their best? And I think that's possible. And you've clearly demonstrated today, Chandy, that it is possible, right? As you made that transformation as a leader and as you've been transforming the team that you lead, we see that it can be possible, and we can create a really strong working environment where people want to be, they want to show up, and they can feel proud of the work that they do every day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's kind of my takeaway too, is something kind of similar, is just that like it is possible and we don't have to just settle for how things are. And so, Chandy, you and I have talked about this a lot, but I really appreciate the work that you're doing, to try to make something different and to make something new and something better. And,
Thanks.
I think it's easy for us to look at the world and just kind of see that it's bad and feel like it's overwhelming, like we can't do anything about it. But, we all have like this little sphere,
Right.
like where we can influence things. And, like you said, who knows what's going to happen to that? You may have somebody that works for you that goes out, does something better and different somewhere else, and it just multiplies. So
that kind of just really quick story to close us out reminded me of the starfish story, which some of you may have heard the starfish story, but it's about, a kid who walks on the beach, and there's all these starfish that are stranded on the beach. And there's hundreds and thousands of them. And he's like walking along the beach, throwing them into the water. And this older man sees the kid and goes, "Man, that's just like a hopeless job. You're never going to be able to rescue all those starfish." And he throws one in and he goes, "Well, it made a difference to that one." Mm-hmm. And then he throws another one in and he says, "It made a difference to that one." Mm-hmm. Right? So he may not be able to make a difference in terms of saving all the starfish, but every single one that he saves, he made a difference for. And I think as leaders, that's what we can do, right? Yeah. We can make a difference for that one, and we can make a difference for that one. We may not be able to change a whole industry. We may not be able to change even the culture in a whole company, but we can make a difference for one person.
Yep, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Chandy, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And yeah, I was excited for you to be on, and I'm really excited that you came and were part of this. So thank you. And, Hannah, this is kind of what we do. We want to help leaders create better environments. To take your analogy, we want to help leaders pick up one starfish and throw them back in. So if people want to kind of find out about us, how we do that work, how can they find us? And how can we be involved?
Best place to start is go to purposeandperformancegroup.com. And we are on all the social medias, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. And just follow us, follow along with the conversation. And we are available to any team that wants to transform the leadership experience and the employee experience, which really starts with the leadership, right? So connect with us. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks. Chandy, thank you. Hannah, thank you. And to everybody listening, thanks for listening in.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, O'Neal Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.